the EPA's determination that mercury emissions from power plants are harmful to health and should be regulated? To be clear, have you ever supported a case against the EPA that claims, quote, this is a quote, human exposure to methyl mercury resulting from coal-fired power plants is exceedingly small? Yes or no?
Senator, that's not a yes or no answer, if I may.
Fair enough.
Okay.
This position seems to question an EPA decision in 2000 in which the agency determined after almost a decade of study that this is a quote from them, mercury emissions from power plants pose significant hazards to public health and must be reduced, close quote. Would you say the legal cases you've supported in the past directly challenge this agency finding, yes or no?
Senator, the challenges we've had as a state,
yes or
along
no?
with the other states, if I
yes
may,
no?
Senator, if I may.
Just hold your fire. Just hold your
Okay.
fire. The legal position you've taken on mercury health also seems to call in question the 2003 testimony from then EPA Assistant Administrator of Air and Radiation Jeff Homestead under George W. Bush, sat right where you're sitting today. And this is what he said. EPA is required to regulate mercury because EPA determined that mercury emissions from power plants pose an otherwise unaddressed significant risk to health and the environment, and because controls options to reduce this risk are available. This Bush EPA statement on mercury risk seems contrary to the legal arguments you supported in the past. Is that correct? Yes or no?
I agree with Mr. Olmstead's position that mercury is something that's very dangerous to our
Thank you very
environment,
much.
should be regulated under Section 112.
Are you aware that the last 3 administrators have publicly stated that the EPA is required to regulate mercury from power plants because of the health risk? Yes or no?
I believe that mercury should be regulated under Section 112.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
According to the EPA, my time is about to expire. I'll just hold it for there. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I don't think you had adequate time to answer some of the questions that were asked. Is there anything you'd like to add to elaborate on?
Yes, Senator, and thank you. I do want to say to Senator Carper's concern with respect to the President-elect's statements throughout the campaign, I believe there is a very important role for the Environmental Protection Agency. In fact, you and I talked about that in your office. I believe that there are air quality issues and water quality issues that cross state line, that the jurisdiction of the EPA, its involvement in protecting our air quality and improving our nation's waters is extremely important. And the EPA has served a very valuable role historically. After all, it was Republicans who created the EPA under executive order in the 1970s, and this body has passed many pieces of legislation since the 1970s to focus upon improving our air and improving our water quality. And we have much to celebrate. Actually, those 6 criteria pollutants under the NAAQS program since 1980 are down 63%. We have made progress as a country, but we have work to do, and the EPA has a very valuable role in partnering with the states to carry out those steps to ensure improving our air quality and protecting our nation's waters. So, Senator Carper, I'm hopeful that in response to your concern about the role of the EPA, I believe it's a very valuable role, and it's something that we should focus on in partnering with our states. With respect to mercury, the litigation that you referred to, there was no argument that we made from a state perspective that mercury is not a hazardous air pollutant under Section 112. Our argument focused upon the cost-benefit analysis that the EPA failed to do. And the Michigan v. EPA case, the Supreme Court actually agreed. So it was more about the process, again, that the EPA was supposed to go through in regulating mercury to provide certainty to those in the marketplace, not a statement with respect to whether mercury should be regulated or not under Section 112. Thank you, Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, General. I'm glad you brought up this thing about the Clean Air Act. The amendments from 1990, I was one of the co-sponsors. It's been incredibly successful. I mean, you mentioned that we've reduced those pollutants by 53%, but what you didn't, 63%, what you didn't add was that is in spite of the fact that we had a 153% increase in our economic activity. That's a major thing. In my introduction, I mentioned this thing that you did that no one could figure out how you did it. Involved a 100-year dispute between not just the state of Oklahoma and the city of Oklahoma City and the Choctaws and the Chickasaws. Do you want to share with us how you did that?
Well, you
know, they tried for 100 years, and you came in and did it in less than 100 days.
You know, less than 8 months into my administration as Attorney General, we were sued as a state by the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation with respect to water in 17 counties in southeast Oklahoma. Many of you, if you know anything about water litigation, it generally takes decades to resolve water litigation. We were able to go from August of 2011 until 2016 and negotiate an historic water rights agreement with those two nations to provide certainty to those that are regulated, to provide a voice to the tribes with respect to water allocation and water quality. And the state has maintained its position as the arbiter of how those permits are allocated as well. So it was a partnership. It was the way things ought to work when litigation occurs, sitting across the table from individuals and working together to try to solve the problem. And, Senator, we were able to achieve that in record time, and I'm very proud of what we did as a state and as the Chickasaw and Choctaw Nation together.
Yeah, that's good. I think also you got them all in one room, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
That works. You've been criticized, and some of the people talking about some of your environmental record. I would like to be sure that people are aware of a number of people. I have some here that I'll submit for the record, but a guy named Ed Feit is the Vice President of Scenic Rivers and Water Quality of the GRDA. This is a person who has really been at the forefront of our Scenic Rivers program. He praises you, saying, I found that General Pruitt has always done the right by our scenic rivers. He's done everything constructive that he told me that he would do. The same thing comes from the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Donald Van der Vaart, he wrote, Pruitt is committed to clean air and clean water and to restoring the EPA to its original mission of enforcing the environmental laws written by Congress. J.D. Strong, head of the Water Resources Board, he said, Attorney General Pruitt, and he goes on and praises you. I'd like to know why it is you have become such a hero of the scenic river people.
Well, Senator, as you know, Oklahoma has endured many decades of dispute with respect to phosphorus levels in the scenic Illinois River. In fact, there's been litigation that's been a part of that dispute for some time. There was actually a memorandum of understanding that Arkansas and Oklahoma entered into around 2002, 2003, and that memorandum expired during my time as Attorney General. There were many in government at the time that said we should just wait on the EPA to come in and address the issue. And I chose a different path. I actually reached out to my Democrat colleague, Dustin McDaniel, the Attorney General of the state of Arkansas, and we were able to negotiate an agreement that had phosphorus levels set at 0.037, scientifically driven, and enforced on both sides of the border for the first time in history. And so I think Mr. Feit is actually the head of the Scenic Illinois Rivers Commission. He's been center on this issue for a number of years, and I think his good word relates to the work that we did in my office working with Dustin McDaniel to achieve that good outcome.
Yeah, I know my time has expired, but Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record at this point in the record the statement by the environmental, the DEQ that I referred to.
Without objection, hearing none, Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Pruitt. As we discussed when you and I met, the oceans off of our ocean state are warming due to fossil fuel-driven climate change. It is crashing our fisheries like lobster and winter flounder and making earning a living harder for our fishermen. I see nothing in your career to give those fishermen any confidence that you will care one bit for their well-being and not just the well-being of the fossil fuel industry. In a process that you could replicate in an Oklahoma high school science lab, excess carbon dioxide from fossil fuel emissions is turning our seas more acid. Rhode Island shell fishermen and shellfish growers are concerned. In my colleague Senator Merkley's state, they've already had oyster spat wiped out for businesses by acidified waters. I see nothing in your career that you would care at all about our Rhode Island shell fishermen. In Rhode Island, we have bad air days, and because of EPA's work, they are fewer and fewer. A bad air day is a day when people driving into work hear on the radio that ozone from out-of-state smokestacks has made the air in Rhode Island dangerous and that infants and the elderly and people with breathing difficulties should stay home on an otherwise beautiful day. Because those smokestacks are out of state, we need EPA to protect us, and I see nothing in your record that would give a mom taking her child to the hospital for an asthma attack any comfort that you would take the slightest interest in her. And your passion for devolving power down to states doesn't help us, because our state regulators can't do anything about any of those problems. They all come from out-of-state sources. In this respect, we are very like Delaware. One of the things I'd like to ask you about here is the connection between you and some of these fossil fuel companies. These are some of the companies that have supported you. These are some of the political organizations that you've raised money for. You've raised money for them for Pruitt for Attorney General, correct?
Yes, sir. I have a campaign committee for that, yes.
And Devon Energy, Koch Industries, ExxonMobil have all maxed out to that account.
I'm not aware
At
if they're
various
maxed out or not, Senator, but I'm sure they've given to that committee.
Oklahoma Strong PAC is your leadership PAC?
It was, yes.
It was? And similarly, they gave money, they maxed out to that organization as well, which you control.
I'm unsure about that, Senator.
Okay. Well, they contributed to it.
I'm even unsure about that as well. I haven't looked at that.
You closed your super PAC, Liberty 2.0, but that took fossil fuel contributions as well, correct?
That particular entity has been closed, yes.
Now, you helped raise money for the Republican Attorney General's Association. While you were a member of its executive committee, they received $530,000 from Koch Industries, $350,000 from Murray Energy, $160,000 from ExxonMobil, and $125,000 from Devon Energy, the company whose letter you transposed onto your letterhead and sent as an Oklahoma Attorney General document. Did you solicit, in your role at the Republican Attorney General's Association, any of that funding?
I'm unable to confirm if they gave those numbers, Senator, those amounts. There are
Did you
several members that
solicit
served.
funding from them as in your role at the Republican Attorney General's
I attended
Association?
fundraising events as an Attorney General, along with other Attorneys General, with respect to the RAGA.
And did you solicit? Did you ask them for money for RAGA?
As I indicated, I attended fundraising events with
But that's
respect to this.
different. Attending a fundraising is one thing. Asking them is my question. Did you ask them for money?
I mean, specifically, you would have to ask about certain entities. I don't know. You
Those are the
entire
entities.
list.
Koch Industries, Murray Energy, ExxonMobil, Devon Energy.
I did not ask of Koch or that, what were the other ones?
Murray Energy, ExxonMobil, Devon Energy.
I have not asked them for money on behalf of RAGA.
And then we have, you said to the chairman that there is nothing that might place you in a conflict of interest that you have not disclosed. Yet you founded the Rule of Law Defense Fund, which is a dark money operation that supports the Republican Attorney General's Association, and you have not disclosed any of your solicitations for that entity, nor have you disclosed what money was raised pursuant to those solicitations. This is an organization that appears to have $1 million a year budget. So very substantial funds have been solicited. I believe you were its chairman. Will you disclose your role in soliciting money and in receiving money for the Rule of Law Defense Fund pursuant to your solicitation?
Senator, a point of clarification. I actually did not start nor initiate the Rule of Law Defense Fund. That is something I did
led
not
it?
do. I've been an officer of that organization for
an officer of
2016. There's an executive staff, fundraisers that actually carry out the functions of that organization. There are many attorneys general that serve on that board. It's not a decision of one. It's a decision of those that have been empowered to make those decisions.
But you haven't told us anything about that. You haven't told us
I have
who
no
you
access to-
asked money
That's a
from. You haven't told us
501c4.
what they gave if you asked them. It's a complete black hole into which at least $1 million goes, and based on your record of fundraising, it appears that a great deal of your fundraising comes from these organizations who are in the energy sector and devoted to fighting climate change.
Some of whom I've actually sued as well, Senator. But with respect to the Rule of
Name
Law
one you've
Defense,
sued up there.
ExxonMobil,
Really?
yes.
My time has expired. We'll pursue this in further questioning.
Yeah, we're involved in, as I indicated, I think in your office, we are involved in, and Senator Inhofe mentioned it in his comments, a situation in Oklahoma where multiple oil and gas companies, ConocoPhillips and others, have defrauded the state in cleanup with respect to spills that have occurred in ExxonMobil.
Yeah, it's a quitam fraud case. It has nothing to do with the environment.
Senator, I would
I think we can reserve that for the second round.
Sure, I'm sorry. He was coming back to me, so I was responding.
Thank you. Before heading to Senator Capito, there are two articles I'll be introducing into the record. One from the Wall Street Journal in September, headline, Hillary Clinton raises more than Donald Trump from oil industry. The second article that I'll be introducing for the record is from Politico from December 27th by Elena Shore, who quotes American Rising Executive Director Brian Rogers. Quote, this is a partisan fishing expedition by 6 liberal Democrats who combined have taken more than $1.2 million from far-left environmentalist groups dead set against any reforms to an out-of-control EPA. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General Pruitt, for being here, for your willingness to throw your hat in the ring to serve. I'd like to quote the ranking member when he says it's hard work, because it is. The EPA is hard work. But one of the things you said really struck me, and I believe that the rule of law does matter. And I'm heartened by your passion for that. The regulatory overreach of the EPA has contributed to economic devastation in my state of West Virginia and in my region. Data from the Mine Safety and Health Administration shows that 60,000 coal jobs have been lost between 2011 and 2016. Thousands of these are in West Virginia. We're in a desperate situation in our state right now because of this. We had a field hearing in Beckley, West Virginia, where our WVU economist, John Deskins, said that the coal industry downturn had resulted in 6 of our southern West Virginia counties being in a Great Depression. For the past 8 years, the EPA has given no indication at all that it cares about the economic impact of its policies, even though Congress has said very clearly in the Clean Air Act and other environmental statutes that we expect jobs and economic factors to be taken into account. That's part of the law. In October, a federal court held that the EPA had failed to evaluate the job impacts of the EPA Clean Air Act as required by 321A of that act, and ordered the EPA to submit a schedule for conducting these the required jobs analysis. Incredibly, the EPA told the court it would take 2 years. This was just just in the last several weeks. It would take 2 years just to come up with a plan on how to do the analysis, which, in my view, if that's part of the law that EPA is supposed to be following, they should already have the protocols set up to do an effective and accurate job analysis. So the court responded like this. This response is wholly inefficient, unacceptable, and unnecessary. It evidences the continued hostility on the part of the EPA to the acceptance of the mission established by Congress. So I would like to ask you to commit to me to ensure that the EPA will follow the law. It is charged with implementing and do those ongoing evaluation of job losses and economic shifts due to the requirements of the Act as required by the law.
Senator, as you indicated, I really believe that it's important that rule of law is adhered to because it inspires confidence in those that are regulated. I think oftentimes those that are regulated don't know what's expected of them. They look at a statute, they see the requirements of the statute, and then those that are regulating act in a way that's not consistent with that framework. And so they don't know what's expected of them, and that causes uncertainty and I think paralysis to a certain degree. So rule of law is something that we should take seriously. It's been at the heart of the litigation that we have initiated as a state. A lot of times these cases, as we were talking earlier with Senator Carper, there's a policy or a political kind of a tension that's drawn to it, but it really is about process and rule of law and making sure that the framework that this body, Congress, has established is respected and enforced. And so I appreciate your comments.
Well, in looking for the balance, we need to have at least a correct analysis of what the economic implications are of regulations. It is so important and critically important that we enforce our environmental laws and to keep our air clean and get it cleaner and protect our waters. In January of 2014, a storage tank in Charleston, West Virginia, was corrupted and went into the river. It was right by the water flow of the major water source in my community. 300,000 people had to do without water for several weeks. It caused a lot of angst economically to small businesses. Imagine a restaurant not being able to use water, or you can't, wash your clothes. You couldn't do anything with the water. But also, and I share this concern about the health and the long-range implications of what's happened. Several people, multiple individuals and Freedom Industries have pled guilty to environmental crimes in federal court, which I'm very pleased about. So let's talk about TSCA, because in TSCA I was able to support a provision that would say that if you're storing in close proximity to drinking water, you have to take that into consideration when you're reviewing potentially hazardous chemicals. Can we count on you to work with this committee to make sure that this bipartisan TSCA reform bill is fully implemented and efficiently and fully?
I'm absolutely, Senator. In fact, I would commend the work of this committee with Senator Inhofe's leadership in passing that update to the TSCA legislation. For the first time in history, as you know, the EPA has the ability to order testing to address chemicals that are going to be entered into the stream of commerce, and that's a very big substantive change that exists. There are many deadlines.
And I would also add that in TSCA, excuse me just a minute because I'm running out of time, in TSCA, we actually expanded the EPA's reach. So when you're asked if you're wanting to get rid of the EPA, to expand that reach of EPA to make sure that I have clean water, and then a spill happens in a community around this country, what's happened in Flint, Michigan, doesn't have the far-reaching implications that it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pruitt, welcome
morning.
to the committee. Thank you for your willingness to serve our country. I want to talk about the Chesapeake Bay program. We talked about that in my office. I explained to you, and I'll do it very quickly, that this is a program that was developed at the state level with the states that are in the watershed, including Delaware, with my colleague, Senator Carper. It's a state that the locals have determined how it's best to reach their pollution targets in order to help preserve the Chesapeake Bay. It's the largest estuary in the Northern Hemisphere. It's critically important. It's complicated. Doesn't flush itself as many bodies of water does. It has a reduction of oyster crops. There's so many problems. All the stakeholders have gotten together. They've worked out a plan. The federal government is part of that plan. It's enforced through the TMDL program, and it has been agreed to by the local governments. It was challenged, the TMDLs, including you joined that lawsuit. The Supreme Court refused to overturn the Court of Appeals supporting the use of the TMDLs. If you are confirmed, will you support the federal role in the Chesapeake Bay program as envisioned by the partners and stakeholders in enforcing the TMDLs if necessary?
Yes, Senator, and as I indicated in our office in our time, at the time that we had together, I really commend the 6 states that joined together to address the Chesapeake Bay and to try to set levels for both point source and non-point source type of discharge into the Chesapeake Bay. There were some concerns about the precedent, the role that EPA was playing initially, but through that litigation, the EPA has acknowledged that their role is more informational, and there was concern in Oklahoma about the Mississippi River Basin and the precedent that was set in that matter, and that's what spawned our litigation. But I really want to emphasize to you, that process represents what should occur. For states to join together and enter into an agreement to address water quality issues and then involve the EPA to serve the role it's supposed to serve is something that should be commended and celebrated. And as it relates to enforcing that TMDL, I can commit to you that, in fact, I will do so.
Part of the federal government's partnership is to provide resources. There are several programs that fund initiatives within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Probably the largest is the state revolving funds dealing with wastewater. Will you support the federal government's partnership through funding these programs that are critically important to make the advancements in the Chesapeake Bay watershed?
Yes, Senator. I believe that the grant-making role of the EPA, as we talked about in your office, is very important to states across this country, whether it's the revolving funds or the WIFIA portions of our statutes, but grant-making in general is very important, and I would commit to you in that regard that I would do so with respect to the Chesapeake Bay.
I want to continue on clean water for one moment. We've had significant problems with safe drinking water and clean water. And let me ask you a preliminary question. Do you believe there is any safe level of lead that can be taken into the human body, particularly a young person?
Senator, that's something I've not reviewed nor know about. I would be very concerned about any level of lead going into the drinking water or in obviously human consumption, but I've not looked at the scientific research on that.
The Clean Water Act provides for federal guidance as to acceptable clean water. It's enforced by the states. So my question to you in regards to clean water is what steps will you take to make sure that our children are safe? We saw in Flint, Michigan, a tragedy occur. Where do you think the federal government needs to strengthen its regulatory roles to make sure that our children are safe from lead?
Well, I think with Flint, Michigan, it's an example of not a delay in response by the EPA. There should have been more done on corrosion control programs with the Flint, Michigan system. As you know, under the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, if there's an emergency situation, the EPA can enter an emergency order to address those kinds of concerns. I think there should have been a more fast response, a more rapid response to Flint, Michigan. I think with respect to water quality, it is infrastructure. Water infrastructure is important. And as you indicated, the states play a very vital role in that process, and there needs to be more cooperation between the EPA and the states to ensure water quality is protected.
Just so I understand it, you have participated in several lawsuits against the EPA's involvement, saying that the locals should have the responsibility. If you are confirmed, will you support federal enforcement, particularly in multi-state issues, where the only way we can get enforcement is at the federal level?
I believe that is a vital role of the EPA, as I've indicated in your office, with air quality, water quality, issues that cross state line. There is an enforcement mechanism that is important and would seek to do so if confirmed as EPA administrator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Pruitt, for being here today, but also for accepting the nomination. It is a service and a sacrifice, not just for you, but for your family as well, to step forward to serve this country. So thank you, sir, for
Thank you, Senator.
being willing to do that. For your testimony, I do thank you. And I'd like to, first of all, let you know that Nebraskans, they've been really affected by the EPA in many instances, and I will give you some examples of that. Nebraska's public power utilities are grappling with how they could ever comply with the EPA's carbon emission reduction mandates. The city of Omaha is struggling with the agency's expensive CSO mandate and drinking water affordability. Nebraska farmers are waiting on new crop technology products that are stuck in a broken regulatory process. Our biofuel investors and producers are desperate for certainty under the RFS. Home builders, transportation stakeholders, and local county officials are concerned about the jurisdictional expansion to control our state's water resources. Communities and small business owners fear that the EPA's ozone mandate will stunt potential economic development and growth in our state. As a result of the activist role the EPA has played for the past 8 years, families are concerned about the futures of their livelihood. We all want clean air, and we all want clean water. That is one point that I know each and every person here agrees on. But with the EPA's tremendous impact on Americans' lives, each and every day, it is important that the agency be open, transparent, and answerable for its actions. Given these concerns, along with the many others that have been and will continue to be discussed today, what steps will you take as the EPA administrator to provide relief for American families that are faced truly with an onslaught of EPA rules?
Senator, you mentioned open, transparent rulemaking. There are concerns that have been expressed recently with respect to regulation through litigation, where groups initiate litigation against the EPA and the United States government and set environmental policy through something called a sue and settle process. I think this body, as well as the U.S. House, have looked at those kinds of issues. And when we talk about open transparency, there's a reason why the Administrative Procedures Act exists. It is intended to provide notice to those that are going to be impacted with rules, to give them the opportunity to offer comment, and to inform the regulators on the impact of those rules. And then it's the obligation of the regulator to take those things into consideration in finalizing rules. Otherwise, they act in an arbitrary and capricious way. And so it's very important that that process be adhered to give voice to all Americans in balancing the environmental objectives we have, but also the economic harm that results. And the Supreme Court has spoke about that rather consistently of late, and I would seek to lead the EPA in such a way to ensure that openness and transparency.
You know, a couple weeks ago, we had I felt a very good conversation about our shared vision for the EPA to bring common sense and accountability back to that agency. And I think that's going to go a long way in restoring confidence in the agency by the American people. One issue we did discuss was the renewable fuel standard and its importance to my home state of Nebraska. We are the largest ethanol producer west of the Missouri River. Our neighbors to the east, Senator Ernst's home state, they do lead the nation in ethanol production. So honoring the congressionally mandated timelines and the volume requirements that are critical from an investment point of view and also from a planning perspective, I think that this is especially relevant, and especially during the current farm crisis that we are seeing and the negative impact on people in agriculture all across this nation. In our meeting, you did express your commitment to me to honor the law, and you echoed President-elect Trump's support for the statute itself and a strong RVO. And for the record, can you please once again express your commitment to uphold the congressional intent of the RFS?
Yes, Senator, and you said it well, to honor the intent and the expression of the Renewable Fuel Standard statute is very, very important. It's not the job of the administrator of the EPA to do anything other than administer the program according to the intent of Congress, and I commit to you to do so.
And you
and
also,
the waiver, and I would say this, the waivers that routinely are offered by the administrator. Recently, another waiver was offered. It should be used judiciously. There's a reason why Congress put in that statute those statutory objectives. The market has changed since 2005, and the waiver authority that's been provided by this body is important, but that waiver authority should be used judiciously, and the act should be complied with and enforced consistent with the will of Congress.
Thank you, sir. And I would ask that you also tell us publicly what you told us, that you will honor the timelines on the volume levels that are mandated by Congress as well.
Yes, yes.
Thank
Senator.
you very much.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Merkley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over a number of years, information started pouring into EPA that the estimate of the amount of fugitive methane escaping in gas and oil drilling been deeply underestimated. In 2011, the EPA put out its best estimates based on the information that was being presented. And this is relevant because methane is a global warming gas more potent than CO2. Gas companies didn't like this because, well, it presented a vision of natural gas being more damaging environmentally than folks had previously understood. Devon Energy is one of the groups that sought to cast doubt on this scientific information, and they came to you to be their spokesperson, and they asked, will you be our mouthpiece in casting doubt and send a letter we have drafted to the EPA? And you sent that letter. And I just want to ask, first, are you aware that methane is approximately 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a global warming gas?
I am, Senator.
Thank
the
you.
impact on human health.
That's the answer. Yes, thank you. It's a yes, no question. And on a 1 to 10 scale, how concerned are you about the impacts of fugitive methane in driving global warming?
Methane, as you indicated, has
1 to
more
10
impact.
scale, highly, 10, very, very concerned, or 1, not so concerned?
The quantities of methane in the atmosphere compared to CO2 is less, but it's far more potent, and it is something.
Are you concerned? I'm asking about your level of concern.
Yes.
Highly concerned?
I'm concerned.
Thank you. Do you acknowledge sending this letter to the EPA in October 2011?
Senator, that is a letter that's on my letterhead that was sent to the EPA, yes, with respect to the
Do you
issue.
acknowledge that 97% of the words in that letter came directly from Devon Energy?
You know, I've not looked at the percentages,
The
Senator.
statement that's been analyzed many times is that all of the 1,016 words, except for 37 words, were written directly by Devon Energy
Senator, that was a step that was taken as Attorney General representing the interest of our state. Over 25%
Yes,
of
so
our
I'm not going to ask that question. I was just asking if you copied the letter virtually word for word. You've acknowledged that, yes, it's in the record. People can count it. It's correct. All right. So a public office is about serving the public. There is a public concern over the impact of methane on global warming. There is scientific research showing that it's far more devastating than anticipated and far more is leaking than, but you used your office as a direct extension of an oil company rather than a direct extension of the interests of the public health of the people of Oklahoma. Do you acknowledge that you presented a private oil company's position rather than a position developed by the people of Oklahoma?
Senator, with respect, I disagree. The efforts that I took as Attorney General were representing the interest of the state of Oklahoma.
Earlier you said excuse me, I'm asking the questions. You said earlier you listened to everyone. In drafting this letter, you took an oil company's position, and then without consulting people who had diverse views about the impact, you sent it off. How can you present that as representing the people of Oklahoma when you simply only consulted an oil company to push its own point of view for its private profit?
Senator, there's an obligation the EPA has to follow processes as established by this body. The cost-benefit analysis under Section 112 is something that they have to engage in. There was a concern about the overestimated percentages that the EPA put in the record. It was a record-based challenge. That was the expression of the letter to the EPA, and it was representing the interest of an industry in the state of Oklahoma, not a company, an industry.
So my question was, what other groups, environmental groups or other groups did you consult so that you had that full perspective before representing simply a for-profit oil company using your official office and your official letterhead?
I consulted with other environmental officials in Oklahoma that regulate that industry and learn from them with respect to the concerns about the estimates that were provided by the EPA.
Can you provide this committee with information showing who you consulted in representing this letter specifically for Devon Energy? Because the information that's in the public realm only shows that they simply sent you a letter, asked you to send it, and you sent it without questions.
We have 7 or so individuals in our office that are involved in these kinds of issues, and we will collect the information they have and provide it to this body pursuant to the chairman's direction.
Your staff expanded substantially while you were in charge to 251 staff members. Why do you need an outside oil company to draft a letter when you have 250 people working for you?
Senator, as I've indicated, that was an effort that was protecting the state's interest and making sure that we made the voices of all Oklahomans heard on a very important industry to our state.
You said it all heard, but you only sent it on behalf of a single voice, the oil company. Thank you.
I still have some time remaining for my questioning. Is there anything you'd like to add that you haven't felt you've had a chance in terms of answering fully some of the areas of the questioning?
I think, Senator, the clarification that the letter that was sent to the EPA was not sent on behalf of any one company. This was not particular to Devon Energy, not particular to Chesapeake, not particular to other companies in our state. It was particular to an industry. The state of Oklahoma has an oil and gas industry that is vibrant to our state, as you might imagine, just like many of you have industry in your state. There was concern expressed by that industry, many folks in that industry, about the overestimating that occurred with that methane rule. That was the communication to the EPA. It was a position of the state, not the position of any one company.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you very much. General Pruitt, welcome to the committee. Thank you for your public service. I'm going to see if I can get through 3 areas in the 5 minutes that I have. First of all, WOTUS, Waters of the United States. Despite there being an injunction against the enforcement of the WOTUS rule, I'm told that EPA Region 7, the region in which Kansas is part, those regional inspectors have increased their inspection of smaller animal feeding operations. Unlike many states, Kansas has a well-established state permit system for small facilities, as well as the delegated authority under the Clean Water Act. Rather than coordinate, the EPA, rather than coordinating with the state agency, the EPA is engaged in its own inspections and its own enforcement on these small facilities, often conflicting with state permitting in the enforcement process. In these actions, the EPA has claimed jurisdiction over features like grass waterways, culverts under county roads, unconnected to the feeding operation, and not situated in or near any body of water. General Pruitt, what would your direction be to the EPA staff, to Region 7 and others, in regard to their actions enforcing WOTUS while an injunction is in place?
Well, Senator, as you indicated, and I do want to acknowledge the same concerns have been expressed by those individuals in Oklahoma and different groups with respect to the WOTUS definition that has been offered by the EPA that is subject to a 31-state challenge that was consolidated there before the Sixth Circuit. And as you indicated, there has been a stay of enforcement against that particular rule. The Supreme Court actually last Friday took up a matter of jurisdiction on that case, so that adds some complexity to this. But I think the role of the EPA prospectively is to seek to provide clarity on what the true definition, what the best definition is with respect to waters of the United States. As you know, there's much flexibility and discretion there given to the EPA, and a series of cases that lead up to the Rapanos decision that haven't provided a tremendous amount of clarity. The best thing the EPA can do going forward is to reestablish that clarity so that states and individuals know what's expected of them in compliance.
General, thank you. I don't think I need to remind you in particular about the role that states play in clean water. But I would take a moment to highlight something that is often, I think, forgotten in the regulatory world of water quality, is the Department of Agriculture, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, in which landowners are assisted through the Department of Agriculture in improving water quality and water quantity in a very partnership-oriented local effort that is significantly different than the tremendous reach from the EPA in Washington, D.C. as compared to the local efforts by landowners themselves to work with USDA to solve problems. Let me move to my second question. It revolves the Flint Hills. That's a native grassland in our state. The owners of those grasslands, these are thousands of acres of grass, they burn the prairie in the early spring for purposes of regeneration of that grass. It is learned from the Indians that lightning used to be the method by which that grassland burned, less so now with the settlement that have occurred of our country. And as a result of that annual burning that is ecologically desirable, there is times in which a city, even one of our own, Wichita, for example, is no longer is then a non-attainment under the Clean Air Act. And I raise this issue to you in asking that you work, if you are confirmed, you work with the state of Kansas in our local efforts to manage the burning of the national grasslands in a way that is advantageous to wildlife habitat, at the same time is done in a timely fashion at appropriate times in appropriate amounts that preserves the air quality. But again, not a heavy-handed approach that one-size solution or a ban fits the circumstance.
If confirmed, Senator, I look forward to working with you on that issue.
I thank you for that. And finally, I want to highlight a small town in Kansas named Pretty Prairie, a typical name or a perfect name for a town in our state. Pretty Prairie, Kansas is a population of about 700 people. For several decades, because of the need because of high nitrates in the city's water levels, I didn't say that very well, because of high levels of nitrate in the city water system, the city has provided free bottled water to its citizens. And my question to you is, now the EPA is disallowing that practice and requiring the city to spend approximately $2.4 million and raise the rates of our residents of that community by $80 a month, while the community seemingly is satisfied with the solution of the city providing an alternative to the expense of a new water treatment plant. I ask this question as an example of where a rigid decision as compared to a community-based decision seems to prevail at the EPA, and would give you an opportunity to confirm to me what I hope you would say is that you will work with communities. You as an Oklahoman, me as a Kansan, and many of the members of this committee represent lots of communities in which the population is insufficient to be able to pay for the costs of water or sewer treatment. We need financial resources to accomplish that, but we also need common sense solutions to the problem.
Senator, I look forward to working with you on that issue as well as the other. There's a saying in the environmental space, national standards, neighborhood solutions. And I think it's important for the EPA administrator, those in Washington, to learn, as I said in my opening statement, to listen and learn from you with respect to the needs of your community and your state, and collaborate with you and the local officials to achieve good outcomes.
I look forward to educating you on behalf of Kansans.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Booker.
Good morning, Mr. Pruitt.
Good morning, Senator Booker.
I have a letter that I read that you sent to the committee last year, and you said that the Oklahoma Attorney General, you said, I am responsible for protecting the welfare of Oklahoma citizens. I assume that's still correct, and you believe that?
Yes, Senator.
And during the past 6 years in pursuit of that, if you look at the record of the lawsuits you filed against the EPA, you've joined or filed 14 lawsuits against the EPA challenging clean air and clean water rules, yes?
We've been involved in multiple pieces of litigation, Senator.
Yeah, but I'm looking at specifically 14, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put those 14 lawsuits into the record of where you specifically challenged the EPA on air quality. And let me just go through some of those.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. To refresh your recollection, you filed 2 lawsuits challenging the EPA mercury and air toxics standards. You filed a lawsuit challenging the EPA's 2015 National Ambient Air Quality Standards for ozone. You filed 4 lawsuits challenging the EPA's Clean Power Plan. You have sued to challenge the EPA's 111B standards for carbon dioxide emissions from new power plants. And you also sued to challenge the EPA's federal implementation plan for Oklahoma under the regional haze rule. You're familiar with those, I imagine.
Yes, Senator.
And you filed a lawsuit challenging the EPA cross-state air pollution rule, something in New Jersey we're very concerned with. And are you aware that that rule, which you lost in that suit, scientists estimate that that alone prevents 400,000 asthma attacks nationally each year? Are you aware of those estimations?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Senator. May I offer?
I appreciate your promotion to being a judge. Let me continue, Mr. Pruitt. I don't have much time.
Okay.
So each of these lawsuits that I just went through and that we analyzed, all of them challenge attempts by the EPA to reduce air pollution. In all of them except one, you filed those lawsuits joining with polluting companies that were also suing the EPA. And so in addition to filing those lawsuits with some of the polluting companies, or at least one that has now been specifically mentioned by two of my colleagues, you used substantial portions of the letters from those companies, put them on your official Attorney General letterhead. And what was sort of surprising to me is that when you've been asked about this in the public, you basically represented that that's actually called representative government in my view of the world. Your testimony here says that you were representing industry, you were representing the polluters. And so with all of these lawsuits you filed and with all of these letters like this one written to the EPA on behalf of the industries that are causing the pollution, it seems clear to me that obviously the fact pattern on representing polluters is clear, that you've worked very hard on behalf of these industries that have their profits externalized, negative externalities are their pollution. And so I just have a question for you specifically about the children of Oklahoma. Do you know how many kids in Oklahoma roughly have asthma?
I do not, Senator.
Well, according to data published by the very nonpartisan group, the American Lung Association, more than 111,000 children in Oklahoma, which is more than 10%, more than 1 in 10 of all the kids in Oklahoma have asthma. That's one of the highest asthma rates in the entire United States of America. Now, this is a crisis, similar data for where I was mayor, and I can tell you firsthand the devastating impacts that kids with asthma, that asthma has on children and families, affecting their economic well-being, parents who have to watch their children struggle to breathe, people that have to miss work, rushing their kids to the hospital. 1 in 10 kids having a disease, missing school, is a significant problem. And so if you've been writing letters on behalf of polluting industries, I want to ask you, how many letters did you write to the EPA about this health crisis? If this is representative government, did you represent those children? I want to know what actions you've taken in the past 6 years in your capacity as protector of the welfare of Oklahoma citizens to protect the welfare of those 111,000 children. Did you ever let any of them write letters on your letterhead to the EPA, and did you even file one lawsuit on behalf of those kids to reduce the air pollution in your state and help them to have a healthy life?
Senator, I've actually provided a list of cases to the chairman with respect to enforcement steps we've taken in multiple pieces of environmental litigation. But let me say to you, with respect to cross-state air pollution and some of the cases you referred to, the state has to have an interest before it can bring those cases, as you know. You can't just bring a lawsuit if you don't have standing, if there's not been some injury to the state of Oklahoma. In each of those cases, the court
My
determined that there
time's
was a state
expired, but
interest.
if I could just say, injury, clearly asthma is triggered and caused by air pollutants. Clearly there is an air pollution problem. And the fact that you have not brought suits at any of the level in which you've represented the industries that are causing the pollution is really problematic when you're going to sit in a position that is nationally supposed to be affecting this reality. And asthma in our country is the #1 reason why children in America, health reason, why children in America miss school. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd submit for the record first an article from the Tulsa World from Scott Thompson. The headline is EPA will be in good hands with Scott Pruitt. Scott Thompson is the executive director of the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality. Talks about the excellent work done and ends with the quote, EPA will be in good hands with Scott Pruitt. I would point out that between 2004 and 2008, and we'll submit this for the record, the most recent employers of Obama administration's senior EPA officials sued the EPA with 12 lawsuits at least in the time that when George W. Bush was in his second term. That included Lisa Jackson, Assistant Administrator Cynthia Giles, Gina McCarthy, and Stephen Owens. They were petitioners and plaintiffs filing suits against the EPA. And finally, I'll submit an editorial where to point out that this one back to the Tulsa World. Over the past 6 years, Pruitt's legal team has consistently shown deference to the legal expertise and professionals at DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality. This was written by the executive director. More importantly, he said, I cannot recall an instance where they did not allow us to pursue legal action when deemed necessary. And then finally from Mike Turpin, who is the former chairman of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, says the job of the EPA is the essential mission of guaranteeing clean air and clean water. Pruitt has never compromised those critical components of a healthy population with any actions he has taken. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Attorney General Pruitt.
Thanks, Senator Rounds.
I noticed that you didn't have the opportunity in the time allotted for Senator Booker's question. Would you care to finish your response with regard to the role that the states have and their ability to either participate in a suit and whether or not they have standing? Would you like to finish your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Senator. And Senator, as I indicated in our office, in your office, when we spent time together, the enforcement role in the state of Oklahoma is different than other states. With respect to the Department of Environmental Quality, the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, we have multiple agencies, Department of Agriculture, that have frontline enforcement authority with respect to our environmental laws. The role that we play in my office largely is a general counsel role. We provide guidance and direction to those agencies. There are many cases we have initiated in conjunction with them, but mainly those agencies enforce actions at their level. Many of those agencies have dozens of attorneys on their staff and a general counsel in their own right bringing those enforcement actions. You mentioned several of the cases, from MATS to cross-state air pollution and the rest. I believe that the cross-state air pollution rule is a very important statute that EPA should enforce. I believe that if there's downwind states that are contributing to non-attainment and upwind states that are contributing to non-attainment and downwind states, that there should be responsibility for those states. We had that issue with Texas at times. And so the lawsuit was not questioning the authority of the EPA to regulate under the cross-state air pollution rule. It was more that they were trying to assess damages against certain states that were in excess of their allocated share. So each of those cases, I would ask you to remember, I'm an advocate in behalf of the state of Oklahoma. There's a state's interest, as Senator Rounds indicated, that has to be in play. To say that any of those cases is about any one company is just simply not right. There's no parens patria standing that I have as Attorney General to bring a case on behalf of a private citizen or a company. There has to be a standing, an injury to the state's interest to bring those cases. And so I would ask you to consider that as we go through those cases that you mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Senator Rounds.
Thank you, and thank you, sir, for your response, your complete response. Also, as the chairman of the subcommittee on oversight of the Environmental Protection Agency, I've had the opportunity to look at their basis or the way that they make their decisions known and the logic they use in getting to those decisions. We had a chance to talk about it in my office the other day, and one of the items that I brought up was the fact that we actually had received comments from the Small Business Administration Office of Advocacy, a copy of which I've gotten, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have put into the record. Thank you. And with this was a letter that was sent to the EPA in October of 2014 requesting that the EPA withdraw the proposed Waters of the U.S. rule, the WOTUS rule, and reevaluate the impacts the rule would have on American small business. Now, this is a federal agency requesting the EPA take a second look at a proposed rule.